Welcome to Lutherans Alive. We believe that God is doing wonderful things through us. And so this is the program that seeks to tell the stories of Lutheran Christians and our ministries here in Southwestern Pennsylvania. I'm Pastor Tony Schneck, pleased to be your host today. And on the program this day, we're talking with Denise Hegemann. Denise happens to be a member of Trinity Lutheran Church, Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and she has had some travels. She has some travels to tell us about, and also about the Book of Faith initiative. Denise, welcome to the program, and tell us first a little bit about what is this Book of Faith initiative?
Okay, the Book of Faith initiative was started about 4 years ago in the ELCA. It came out of a grassroots program through a church in North Carolina, where they felt that many Lutherans no longer knew the Bible as well as they had in the past. And they wanted to do something to begin improving what they called biblical literacy. And so people would know the stories of the Bible and would have a better understanding of what they meant for their daily lives. And so the initiative had a couple of points to it. One was helping those who shared and taught about the Bible learn a little bit more about what educational theory has to teach us along those lines. And then the other was to begin looking at Scripture themselves and to come up with some methods for studying the Bible that could be used by anybody and not necessarily required special training.
And there have been some resources that have come about as a part of the Book of Faith initiative, have there not?
Right. A new study Bible was designed for Lutherans to use, along with new curriculum for students, which includes a student Bible and also a story Bible for younger children. And I know members of our congregation have been very excited about that, and grandparents wanting to buy them for grandchildren because it's a very colorful and easy to access Bible. In addition, every synod has a Synod Book of Faith advocate, and I am that person for the Southwest Pennsylvania Synod. And we get kind of heads up on some new materials as they come out, and also a little bit more about what resources are available for congregations who may be looking at improving their Bible study.
And it's a wonderful thing because, I mean, we Lutherans, even dating back to the Reformation, 500 years, have a heritage of being people of the Word, and that we should be deeply rooted in it. And that's it's part of our roots, and we need to be rooted in the Word if we're going to be people of the Word, so to speak.
Right.
Well, thank you for your involvement in that project and initiative, and for your leadership even here in our synod as far as that is concerned. And now it's my understanding that also you had a trip to the Holy Land as a part of this initiative. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, please?
Well, it was decided that maybe one of those little extra things that the initiative could do is beginning looking at study tours. And so they started off with 3 study tours. There was one to Turkey to look at some of the places Paul would have traveled to. They're also looking at doing one going to Germany, and if these are successful, maybe some in the future. The one I went on was a pre-Lenten trip to the Holy Lands, where we went to Israel and Jordan. And we did some of the usual touristy type things, but mostly it was to try to help some of those things that were just dots on a map in your Bible before be a place that you could actually think about and picture in your mind, and to also visit some of the Lutheran pastors who are doing ministry over in those countries.
Oh, wonderful. And how did you find the places? Did you? I mean, it was an enjoyable trip. What were some of the things that you saw? Some of the places, specifically, some of the places that you traveled to.
Our tour had 2 local people kind of coordinating. One was Diane Jacobson, who is the person who is kind of overseeing the Book of Faith initiative, and then another Book of Faith Synod associate, Mark Greyrock. And they had both been there before, so they helped decide what places would be good places for us to go and visit, and also arranged to have Bible studies and devotions at many of our places where we stopped. Some of the places we went to were Capernaum, of course Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem. We also did a little side trip to Jordan in order to go to Mount Nebo, which is where Moses overlooked the Promised Land, and then on to Petra, which, although is not mentioned in the Bible, has a lot of biblical connections with it.
Any of those places sort of stand out as specifically wonderful memories for you? What kind of experiences did you have at some of the places?
Well, one of the things we found was, although every night we got together as a group and began processing what we did, we were kept pretty busy, so in a lot of ways things didn't stand out until after you kind of came back and said, wow, I was actually there. As I hear scripture readings in church now, it's like I have a picture and I can say, I was actually there. I saw that. So when we were there, though, it was kind of like we kept saying, when's it going to hit us? Are we going to start feeling different as we walk in the footsteps of Jesus or go to some of these places? But every day actually had its own surprises, so it's hard to say one place was more memorable than another. There was just something unique every day in our experience.
How long was your trip?
It was a 10-day trip, and there were 34 people in our group, all Lutherans, a number from Minnesota area, another group from Virginia, a couple from Montana, and then 2 of us from Pennsylvania, and 1 person from Kansas. So it was a group that was large enough to meet people from around the United States, but also small enough that we really got to know each other during those 10 days. And everybody got along really well. And I think between the great leadership, the common faith experience, and the fact we had a group of people who got along really helped make the trip as much as any of the sites we saw.
Wonderful. It helps when everybody gets along.
Yes, it does.
It's a lot of time to be together, I'm sure.
Yes.
Good.
A lot of time on a bus.
But what an exciting trip. Now that you're back, how has that trip been helpful in your continued work with the Book of Faith Initiative?
It gives me some more ideas of how seeing places, learning the history, geography of a country can make the Bible also come to life, as much as just stories that I have heard for years and years had new meaning once I was there. One that comes to my mind is the story of Peter's confession, where he says to Jesus, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says to him, "You're now Peter the rock, and on this rock I'm going to build my church." Well, I never had an image as to what was around that location. I didn't know there was this huge, massive rock face right about where they would have been sitting looking at that had a temple to the god Pan in it. And so visualizing it with this huge rock and the idea that not in the rock, but on the rock was going to be Christ Church. It's a whole different way of looking at that confession than I had before.
Indeed. That is a wonderful story. And I think very important for us who are disciples, that faith in Jesus is the rock on which the church is built, and having that conversation with Peter and it's sort of playing off his name there. It's a wonderful story. Denise, thanks for what you shared so far. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back with more as we come back on Lutherans Alive. Welcome back to Lutherans Alive. We're here with Denise Hegemann. She's a member of Trinity La Trobe, and we're talking about the Book of Faith Initiative and her travels to the Holy Land. Of course, the Holy Land there and that whole area of the Middle East is unique, in the news a lot. How was it crossing from one place to another, going from one place to another in terms of security issues and things? Do you have a story to tell us about that?
The Holy Lands is someplace I've always wanted to go to, but because of the situation over there, oftentimes when opportunities would come up, I was a little leery about how safe it would be. But things had settled down a good bit, and we were assured things would be safe, so I was very happy to do this trip. But then we had to cross into Jordan, and so leaving Israel behind, and we were told that they don't make the crossing real easy. One of the things was the bus driver that we had, he could take us to the edge of an area, but then what we would have to do is get off of the bus with all of our luggage and then get on small transports to take us the rest of the way across. And then we would meet with their officials in Jordan and eventually meet up with a new bus driver to take us around Jordan. Well, our tour directors weren't real excited about that, partly because you start taking a group and putting them in a bunch of different buses, and you're not always sure when everybody's going to get together. Plus, they couldn't make sure there was somebody with each group to watch over materials. So our bus driver, who had been with us, I'd say probably about 4 days at this point, he made an offer to our group, and he said he would be willing to drive us all the way across. But the issue would be, once he took us all the way over, he would have a half hour for all of us to get off the bus with all of our luggage and to leave, or his bus would get impounded and would be searched, which would make life very difficult for him and for the company he was driving for. And so I said, if we thought we could do that in a half hour, he would be more than happy to take us all the way over. Well, if you've done any traveling with tour groups, you know how long it can take to get 30 people off of a bus as they start trying to find all their various little pieces, and that usually doesn't include unloading all of the big luggage from underneath the bus. But our group was so appreciative of his offer, and it was emphasized to us just how out of the way he was going in order to do this for us, that as it turned out, in under 10 minutes, we had everybody off the bus with all of the luggage. Nobody worried about where their luggage was. They just all pitched in and helped out. And I couldn't help but think afterwards, as I thought about that experience, how it reminded me a little bit of the gospel message, that what we do is in response to what God has already offered to do for us, that he doesn't have to offer to do for us through Christ on the cross. In the same way the bus driver didn't have to offer to go out of the way and take a chance of being the one to pay the penalty. And in turn, in response, it's amazing the things we can do when we want to help God in the same way we want to help that bus driver out. And also when we all work together like we did on that and weren't just looking out for our own luggage and our own selves, but trying to make sure everybody was taken care of.
That's neat. And I don't know if such records are kept, but under 10 minutes, that probably has to be a record, I'm sure.
But yes, we were surprised at how quickly, and I know that he appreciated us doing that for him also.
That's what's wonderful. Now, any trouble on the way back?
On the way back, it's not as difficult as going over there. And there were differences. You ask about security. We noticed in Jordan, it's actually a normal policy to have somebody from their military ride in all tour buses. And that's been going on for a long time. But unless you really went up to the very front of the bus, you never realized that gentleman was there. Other things, when you would load the bus, no luggage was put on the bus until you pointed to it and said, yes, that's my luggage, just to make sure nobody had left anything there. So overall, we felt fairly safe. Coming back, I mean, we did get pulled aside as a group, and we wondered what that was all about, but in reality it was to help speed us our going across and getting all of our passports checked. And we were told by other Palestinians that we had talked to that if you're a Palestinian, not an American, it would not have gone as smoothly as it went for us.
Wow. And now talk again, if you would, please, about how many different places you went to in that 10 days. It sounds like you covered a lot of territory in those 10 days.
Yes, we did. After a very long, almost 12-hour flight, we arrived in Tel Aviv and spent the night in a nice motel right on the shore of the Mediterranean Sea. It was nice waking up the next morning refreshed and seeing the palm trees and the sea out our windows. But right away then we kind of packed up our bags and headed to around the area of Galilee. And we spent the next 3 days at a motel that was run by a kibbutz there in Galilee. And that's where we did stops at places like where the Sermon on the Mount took place, the feeding of the 5,000. We did some other areas around there, went to Capernaum and saw Peter's house, saw the synagogue across the way from his house. And of course, afterwards asked and said, okay, was that really Peter's house? And we're told that they're probably about 95% sure that that was the home of Peter because of graffiti that they found on the wall from where it was turned into an early home church there. So some of the sites we saw we knew for sure were the place. Others we knew. We were in the general area. The kibbutz we stayed at is actually the one that a few years ago, when the sea was beginning to drop in water level because of water shortage, saw something sticking out of the mud and eventually discovered a fishing boat. And it took a long, hard process to figure out how to get it out without having it dry out and crumble. But they discovered a boat that goes back to the time of Jesus, which they now have displayed at a museum. It's referred to as the Jesus boat. Most likely Jesus did not actually ride in that boat, but it would have been from that time period, and it very much matches drawings and mosaics from that time. Also had a nice tour of the kibbutz and learned a little bit about life there and how it has changed over the years. The person who took us around said when she was a child, all the children were raised together in a common room by a common person while the parents went off to work. Maybe saw their parents for 3 hours over dinner, and now they basically are in the home with the parents and grown and raised. The communal meals have stopped. People have more ownership of their own places there. So we learned a little bit about that culture and experience. From there we went down to Jordan, where, as I said, we visited Petra. Recently I saw where Petra was one of the 10 places you should go to before anything ends up messing it up because of the locations. But it's where Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was filmed, so we got to see that. And yes, while we were there, we did see camels. They were offering camel rides and donkey rides and those type of things. Then we kind of went down more to the Jerusalem area, where we did visit the Mount of Olives. We did the Palm Sunday walk from the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem, visited Old City Jerusalem, the Wailing Wall. Some students from my catechism class had written up prayers when they heard I was going. And so while we were there, I put those prayers into the Wailing Wall for them. We also went and saw where the Dead Sea Scrolls had been found and walked around that area. We had a chance to go up to Masada, which was used by Herod as a stronghold in case he and his family ever really had to escape and protect themselves. And so he built it all up and stored all sorts of grain and other rations there and never ended up needing it. But the last Jewish stronghold against the Romans were up there, and they were able to eat the food he had left there and last for about 2 years before the doors were broken down. And many people are familiar with that story because of the Hollywood depiction of the story. But to actually walk there and see the lots with the names of the 10 people who were the ones who had to help the rest of the group commit suicide so that none of them would be taken captives by the Romans. We also went to a Holocaust museum while we were there, and that was a very interesting experience also, to kind of hear from the Jewish point of view what stands out in their mind about those days.
Indeed, it sounds like you covered a lot of territory in those 10 days. And thanks for sharing what you've shared so far. We're going to take another break. And right after this, we'll continue our conversation with Denise Hegemann right here on Lutherans Alive. Welcome back to Lutherans Alive. We continue our conversation with Denise Hegemann, talking about the Book of Faith initiative and travels to the Holy Land. And Tell us, Denise, there is indeed a Lutheran presence there in the Holy Land. Can you tell us about what our Lutheran Church is doing there? How are the congregations there? What kind of interaction did you have with our brothers and sisters there in the Holy Land?
Yes, that was one of the things that made this tour very attractive, was it wasn't going to just be a tour of areas, but an opportunity to also meet and talk with some people there. We went to Bethlehem, and recently, in the last few years, a wall has gone up around Bethlehem in order to try to cut down on some of the violence in the Middle East. And so we met with Pastor Rahab, who is there at Christmas Lutheran Church in Bethlehem, and we got to hear a little bit about some of the work they've been doing to also try to encourage peace. And one of the things that was surprising to me is that only 2% of the population in the Palestinian territories and in Israel is Christian anymore. And yet pretty much the country counts on Christian tourists to help their economy. And so he talked about the struggles of Christians there and how for them, since they don't have quite the same tie to the land that Jewish people do, the violence had led many of them to leave. And so we spent a good deal of time there trying to show them that there was support and that people cared about the Christians who were living over in the Holy Lands. And he talked about the cooperative place that they have there. It actually is the third largest employee for the city of Bethlehem. They do a lot of work with children, helping them to get good educations and to have more tolerance for one another and people of different backgrounds. They have a program for young people that's a leadership program to help them develop their skills and see what they can do. They also operate the only Lutheran college in the Holy Lands and in the Middle East. And they offer programs in areas like tourism, jewelry making, film. A lot of students do documentaries about what's going on there. But they teach courses that will give them a livelihood when they get out, along with a lot of just basic things that are good for people to know. In addition, they also work a lot with families. So there's not much in that area to help people learn how to make a marriage last, let alone how to be a good parent. And so they try to disguise that in some of their ministries that they do with families. And one of the other big problems is there aren't things like Social Security or programs for the elderly there. So they have programs that work with that to bring people in and give them some time to socialize, to see that they have meals, see that they get the health care that they need. And so it was good to see our benevolence money sponsoring some of these type of programs in the Middle East under difficult situations. One of the things we definitely learned was the political situation is a lot more complex than we understand over here just by what the news media covers.
I'm sure.
Also, our last day, we went to Redeemer Lutheran Church in Jerusalem. Pastor Schrenik gave us a tour there, and we actually had a closing communion service in their chapel area. And he took us into their main sanctuary. It was a church built by Germans a number of years ago. And he said they had discovered part of the temple wall underneath their building, so they're beginning to excavate that and hope to have that open. But he said they're a small congregation, but they do such ministry that the World Council of Churches had allowed them to join, even though they're much smaller than most denominations that could be there. And he does a lot with tourists who come through the area. While we were there, we were also able to walk up their bell tower. They have a bell tower. It's just under 200 steps, and it's pretty much a single file walk. But if you get all the way up to the top, you have a beautiful view of the city of Jerusalem from there. And you begin to realize just how close that was to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And so it's in that same general area.
Mm-hmm. Neat. And as you said before, even if some of these sites aren't exactly what they claim to be, I would think that just being in the vicinity of these places, in the general area of where our Lord walked during his earthly ministry, that in of itself would be incredibly meaningful and just a powerful experience, I'm sure, just to get a sense of what the place sort of looks like, and the topography, and all of that would sort of help bring the story to life.
I was going to say, one of the places where a really neat view kind of came from that. We went to the church that commemorates where Jesus wept over the city of Jerusalem before Holy Week. And you can sit in that church, and there's a glass window you look out of when you see this beautiful view of the city. And you can almost picture Jesus pausing there. And it's one of those stories you kind of skip over a lot of times just reading the Bible. But now it's taken on new meaning.
How has being involved with the Book of Faith initiative and the trip in general, how has it left a mark on you? How has it impacted your own faith journey?
It gives me a greater appreciation of what some of this land looked like, to see the difference between Galilee and all the green that you see there, going out into the desert area and seeing just how dry it is, and realizing how in many ways in this country life is still the way it was in Jesus' day, but yet none of them really realized who Jesus was, that there's that difference in how we see it. But I think probably the biggest impact from this trip was actually the many times where we paused at these different places for worship. One of the things we discovered is we think for Lutheran spiritualities in their music as much as anywhere. And there's some hymns now that I'll never be able to sing without thinking of the group and the experience there.
Wonderful. Denise, thanks so much. May God continue to bless your work with the Book of Faith initiative, and may we continue to be people of the Word.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us on Lutherans Alive today. Wherever you're from, in your community, near your community, there's a Lutheran congregation that would be pleased to welcome you. Won't you come worship with us, and won't you join us next time on Lutherans Alive?